Okay, so let's start with the first test, and it's going to be called a product image store test. This particular class will take care of all the tests that are responsible for image uploading for the given product. So PHP Artisan make test, and it's going to be product image store test, and that should now show up here. There we go. And we're going to remove this stop here. We're going to use refresh database, so use refresh database trait. We're also going to use this response trait that I've created for this course. There we go. So we're also going to override the setup. So override setup. There we go. So we use the parent setup, but we also actually override a few configuration variables or config. We're going to use file system systems. Let's just check. That is config file systems. There we go. So that's the file we want to override a few variables for, and we're gonna go for so that's going to be an array. Default, we want to make sure, regardless of what's set under the env file, we want to make sure that we are using public for tests, and then we also want to set max size. Is that how it's called? Let me just max size. We want to make sure that it's no more than 1 megabyte, so 1000 kilobytes. And that's our config done. Then we're going to create product property, which will be factory product class, and we just create a single product so we can actually associate any uploaded image with it. So let's create the variable, the property for this class, and I'm going to use product here. That needs to go. It's going to be product, and I'm using 7.4, but my IDE clearly doesn't understand this, so PHP, and this is because of the Composer JSON, which uses 7.2.5 for this version of Laravel, which I'm using. So let's just go 7.4, so I can use typed properties. Let's apply this. There we go, and that highlight is now gone. Okay, so our setup is done. The first test we're going to write will check that the validation fails when we send an empty request. So test validation fails with empty request. And what we're going to do is simply, I'm just going to close this terminal. We're going to create response equals this post JSON, and before we go any further, I've forgotten to show you our routes. I've already set all the routes that we need for this project. So the landing page get is going to point to page controller index. Then we have the product page, which is, if we go back to the browser, that's the product page. So we have the ID of the product that will display the upload form. So that's this view. Then we have post method for storing the image, and then we have delete method for destroying the image, for removing the image, basically associate the image from the product. Okay, so post, and we're going to use a root, and we use product store image. We need to provide the ID of the product, so this product ID, and we're not sending anything with it. That's why we should receive the unprocessable entity response. So this, in other words, 422 status, this equals assert response unprocessable with JSON. So we pass the response, and then JSON that we should receive should say file, and let's use the language helper, but that's going to be within the array. It's going to come from a validation required. And where are these coming? These are just messages stored within the resources, language, English by default, validation. And if you look for required, this is what we're going to get. So the message is going to be the attribute field is required, and now the attribute we can replace. I'm sure you already know that, but if you don't, then you can pass these arguments here. So attribute should be replaced with file. So the message will say, if we just go back, the file field is required. That's what we should receive. So if I run this test, obviously this is going to fail because we don't even have a controller yet. So we're getting 500. If I was to run this test without exception handling, run it again, you'll see that it tells me that the target class product controller does not exist. Okay, so that's all fine. Let's just save it. Open terminal, PHP Artisan, make controller, and it's going to be product image controller. Let's open that product image controller. Let's close this. We can close this, and we can close that. HTTP controllers and product image controller. We're going to need two methods, so let's just put them straight away, just as stubs for the time being. So public function store, and it will return, it will return something. At the moment, it doesn't matter. Let's just keep it this way. Then we're going to have public function destroy, and this one will return new JSON response, which will say success true. But obviously before that, we will have to remove the image and so on. We haven't got functionality for this yet, so that's why I'm leaving this like that. But I'm going to specify what it returns, and we're going to say remove image. And for the store, I'm going to create the doc blocks as well, store new image. Okay, so if we run this, obviously we're going to get different error this time, 200, which is okay, 42 is unprocessable entity, which is what we're expecting, but obviously everything went through without causing any trouble. And this is because we obviously don't do any validation yet. So the next thing we're going to do is to create the request. So what I'm going to do is open the terminal. We're going to call PHP Artisan make request, and this request will call upload image requests, and it's going to be under product namespace. So product upload image request. So let's inject the instance of this request. So upload image request, it's request, let's update doc blocks, and for the time being, that's all within the controller. Open our requests, product and upload image request. I'm going to close the terminal. Authorize, I'm not bothered with. I don't need this for the time being. Let's just close this here. So upload image request. I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to do, because what we are going to put in this request will be used across multiple with other modules basically. So it's not just for the product image upload, it may also be used for uploading PDF documents, anything for anything basically. We're going to have asset model shortly, we'll introduce it, which will basically keep track of all these files. And it will be used with any other model that we'll have within our application. So rather than storing everything within this simple request, what I'm going to do is create a trait which we can then reuse with anything else that we might have with the upload. So for that purpose, under the app, I'm going to create the assets namespace, so new directory assets. Then we're going to have requests. And under requests, I'm going to create the trait called image upload request. Request st. Okay, and that's going to be a trait. So what I want to do is cut these rules from here and use this trait. So use image upload request. Let's just go back to this one, and inside of this image upload request, I'm going to paste these rules, and the rules will return array. And now here we're going to have, now because we want to reuse it with other modules, what we might have is to add the method which will specify what name of the field we are looking for. So it will be, rather than just typing it, file, for instance, some modules might have a different name of the index that they're going to be sending with the request. So we're gonna go for this field, and then we're going to have a set of rules. It's going to be required. It's going to have to be image. This particular trait obviously refers to the image, so it needs to be an image. And we will want to make sure the maximum file size is going to be coming from the config file system systems, and we have max file size. So that obviously comes if we go back to our config, we have our file systems, the variable we've specified here, which comes from the max file size and the .env. We haven't added this variable. If you want to override the default value, which is 10 megabytes, then obviously feel free to add this max file size to your collection here. Otherwise, you can just leave it the way it is. Okay, so I think for our validation, that's it. Obviously, we need this field, but now field won't be necessarily only associated with the image. As I said, this component that we are writing now, I would like to be reused with any other module, including for files like PDFs, documents, and that sort of things. So we are going to create another trait under the, if we go assets requests, and we are going to call this one upload request. And it's also going to be a trait. We are going to use this trait within this image upload request. So use upload request. And here we're going to have this method field. So fields, it's going to be public function field, and it needs to return string, and we'll return by default file. But if we need to override, obviously we have a way of doing this. Now, the other thing that we want to use, another method that we need here, and here we're going to add the doc block, but rather than actually specifying what it returns, we're going to use inherit doc, because we're going to have an interface which we create in just a moment, which will make sure that this, which will require this method. So we add the doc blocks over there. Now we're also gonna have to have disk method, which will specify to which disk we are actually uploading this file. In our case, at the moment, we're gonna start with the public, which is a local storage. Later on, obviously, I'm going to show you how to upload it all to DigitalOcean Spaces. So public function, this way you will be able to upload files to whichever disk you want within the same system instance. So disk, and we're going to store the reference to it together with the record within the database. So string, and again, we're going to add inherit docs. Inherit doc, there we go, and by default we're going to return config, and it comes for file systems default. So that's the default disk that we're going to be using. So that's our upload request. Now going back to our image upload request, we also need to add the method that will specify which directory the file should be uploaded into. Files will be, so images will be, say, in an images directory. Then if we have any other type, another trait for, let's say, PDF documents, they might be in a separate directory called PDFs, and so on. We're gonna have this flexibility basically if we need to. So public function directory, and it's going to return a string. And let's add the doc block. This again will be required by the interface. So inherit doc. And in our case, we're going to return image. We don't have this class yet, so let's just put image directory for the time being. So images, and let's put the to-do node, because we're going to later on replace it with the method of a class we're going to create. So going back to our upload image request, what we want to do is to create the interface. And this interface is going to be called asset upload request contract. That's how I'm going to call it. So under the assets, I'm going to create a new PHP class, and it's going to be called asset upload request contract. You could call it interface if you want to. I'll stick with the contracts. Okay, and that is interface. There we go. And we've already seen that our upload request, if I just open this in this split window, has this field method. So that's the first method that we're going to need. And let's just put it. Now it returns string, and we're going to say get field name. Then we're going to have from this other one, disk. There we go. We have this directory method as well. So let's put it on the interface as well as requirement. So this is going to be get directory name. Then we are going to have a disk as well. Public function disk. So get disk name. Yeah, that's fine. And we'll also have, what else are we going to have? We're going to add visibility as well, because we want to specify visibility, but visibility won't come from any of these traits, because that's going to be the case specifics. For, so let's say for product, for instance, images, we want them public, but if we had PDF documents for the products, perhaps we want to only display them after the authentication. We could have a different request and then specify that we want them to be private, have private visibility. So obviously not being visible to the public unless they are logged in, and then we obviously route it through a different route. Okay, so let's put this public function visibility string, and we are going to say get file visibility. And one other thing that we will require is something that actually comes from within our form request. And that method is called file. So I'm just, not files, it's going to be file. Let me just quickly find it. File is here. So just so I can actually copy all this back to make sure that it's actually required by our interface. And now we know that obviously that can only be applied, well, can only be applied to any form. It can be applied to any form request because it's going to have this file method by default, or any other class that obviously has implementation of this method. Okay, so if I just now use implement this asset upload request contract. So let's now add the remaining method stubs. So the only one that we need is the visibility. Everything else comes from the traits. So visibility, and let's add this doc block as well, saying that it comes from the inherited interface, and return. And we're going to use file system interface. Contract file system, and it has visibility private and public, which if we have a look at these two constants, you can see it's just a keyword, public or private. So this particular one, images for the for our product will have public visibility. If obviously if you want to change it, feel free to change it to private, but I think it makes sense to have them publicly available. Okay, so our request is now completed. Let's run our test. Now we should have it passing, and it does pass. One test, 2 assertions. Wonderful. If we now close this interface as well. So that's the first test. Now, if we go and check that, if we send the file, I'm just going to actually close this control for the time being, and file system on the left hand side. The next test we're going to check whether, check to make sure that validation fails with empty value as well, because we may send, I'm just going to copy all this, we may send index file with it, but obviously it may be an empty one. So post JSON, and we're going to have file that is just an empty string. That should also fail with exactly same message. So let's just test it, and it does. So now, by the way, I'm using PHP Storm, so for me it's just a shortcut here. Obviously, if you are using just terminal, just run PHP unit, and that will run all the tests. If you want to run specific test suite, so if we just go down here, you can obviously do PHP unit and point to the file. So tests, we're gonna go for feature and product image store test. That does exactly the same thing, running all tests. If you want to just run a single test, what you can also do is copy the name, do the same as before, and then just -- filter equal, and oops, sorry, let's just do it again. Filter without equal. This copying. Okay, I'm gonna have to type it in. So filter validation fails with empty value. So you can also filter it this way. So it's only going to run this test, obviously. But I'm going to use the shortcut. Obviously, you know now how to do it if you don't have shortcuts within your IDE to run the given test.